spend a couple of minutes with an audience trying to explain who we are and what we're trying to do, and we are is the Canadian Society for Unconventional Resources. We're approximately 11 years old right now as an organization, and basically we're a technical group that was formed to provide all of industry, all of society for that matter, basically technical information related to the exploration development of unconventional resources. And 10 years ago, we didn't have very big audiences. Everyone is interested now in that topic. We are a non-profit organization, so we're not aligned with any specific industry per se, any industry corporation. We do have over 120 member organizations, so it's a very diverse membership group. Interestingly enough, over 50% of our membership is not the industry in that standard framework, but it's more academic organizations, some consulting firms, government agencies, service companies, even some financial firms. But we do have about half our membership is in the small and large E&P enterprises. So I think that diverse membership base allows us to look at a lot of issues in a very broad context, and it drives our membership to basically get factual information out to anyone interested, be it industry or be it stakeholder groups or synergy groups. The pie chart here basically is exactly the breakdown I just finished talking about. As you can see, pretty diverse, and so industry is about half of our membership, but all other organizations also comprise a pretty large component. So hopefully that lets us speak with a somewhat unbiased viewpoint, because we get our sources of information from a lot of different groups. So when I've got the call to come up to Red Deer and talk about the future, but they also wanted some discussion on current trends, which kind of is a good barometer as to what the future may bring. So I thought we would talk about this flip that Rick was talking about from conventional to unconventional. It has happened. It's not stopping. Talk about how that affects the natural gas story. You got a little bit of a preamble again. Rick was my front man. He covered a few things. I appreciate that. I want to talk about light oil, because it's the big topic going on in development in the U.S. and soon to be at a theater near you in Calgary and Alberta. And then my guesses for the future. And no, I'm not going to pick the Flames to make the playoffs. Uh-oh. So what's an unconventional resource? And I'm sure everyone here probably knows the answer, but I do wander from the script every now and then. I was meeting with one of the federal ministers about 3 weeks ago, and we're all around the table talking about how the federal government can help us with LNG development. So I introduced myself, and he said, "Don't mean to interrupt, but what's an unconventional resource?" Whoa, okay. So not everyone knows. It's basically our move as an industry towards producing hydrocarbons from rock, from lithologies that previously were never considered to be economic to produce because they were very, very low quality. So the term you've heard for light, tight oil or gas, tight gas reservoirs, shale gas, they're all basically ubiquitous terms for low quality rock that we now are able to extract hydrocarbons from in commercial quantities. Major breakthrough on our industry's part. Because we're now accessing this low quality rock, the amount of reserves we're now liberating from this technique is enormous, and it's going to be transformative for North America. It's already started about 3 years ago. And the reason we're doing that, this part of the triangle was where the industry was for the last 50 years. Leduc was the start of a high-quality oil discovery. Last 10 to 15 years, industry moved into lower quality, tighter sands, tighter carbonate reservoirs, started producing more modest wells, Still, we're making money, but not at the quality and quantity that we used to expect and used to have. So what you saw from Rick's curves, our gas reserves and our gas productivity in Alberta were dropping. Our oil production was dropping. We were starting to run out of the medium quality reserves. Then we moved down to this part of the triangle and tried some things about 5 to 10 years ago. We tried developing coal bed methane successfully in Alberta, quite a bit of it around Red Deer area. We tried exploiting light, tight oil reservoirs around Pembina and in Cardium Pool, quite successfully. We went to tight gas reservoirs, liquids-rich gas reservoirs. All of them seemed to be working. So we started exploiting this big, big bottom part of the triangle. You can see this is much bigger than this. And how did we do that? Well, everyone knows this slide. Horizontal drilling. We got really good at doing this. When I started drilling my first horizontal wells in Saskatchewan in the early 1900s, I've got Alzheimer's, I must be 150 years old here. So in the 1990s, we were able to target reservoirs approximately 2,000 meters below the ground, and we could hit a target of about 5 to 10 meters accuracy. Today, we can hit a target within 2 to 3 meters at 1,500 meters below the surface and stay in that zone for 1 to 2 miles. I've done it. It's amazing science that we have. We now have the ability, and Mark's going to talk about this, to hydraulically fracture or stimulate these zones. Stimulation of wells is something we've been doing for 50 years. They use this word fracking, which is kind of a scary word, lots of consonants in it, but it's a stimulation technique. We do it over a whole interval, and it makes a heck of a difference on the productivity. So, because we've applied those techniques, the world has changed. The energy industry has changed. Unconventional now is the dominant new energy source for North America. Horizontal wells now account for more than 70% of the wells being drilled in Canada, over 90% in Saskatchewan and BC alone. It now accounts for over 50% of U.S. natural gas production and over 30% in Canada. Only reason we haven't got over 30% in Canada is because our gas is the lowest priced gas in North America and almost in the world. So it's a good news, bad news story. As everyone knows, you bring on new kinds of new production, new reserves, you drop the price. But that's not a bad thing because it's changed the economics of the North American continent. So I've got some graphs on the trends. Canadian natural gas production, as Rick talked about, has been dropping steadily since 2006, where it was at almost 17.5 BCF a day. This is for Canada. Down below around 13.5 BCF. Massive drop in gas production. But look what's happened down south. They haven't had that stop. That's the gas production that's come from the Utica and Marcellus shales in Pennsylvania. They found another Canada in one state. Graph on the Marcellus alone, from virtually 4.5 to 5 BCF a day to 12 BCF a day, and it's still climbing. And that's our market. Looks like they've got their own supply. What does that mean to Alberta? Because I try to bring everything back to the Alberta connotation. On the right side here, production and demand in BCF per day. So in 2002, close to 14 BCF a day in Alberta, dropping down to a projected demand in 2022, of just over about 8 BCF. What's neat about this graph is it shows that the bottom two is commercial demand and residential demand, very infinitesimal in the natural gas story. Doesn't really make that much difference. This is the bitumen requirements, Rick. And this is the dropping off of our conventional and unconventional gas in Alberta over the next 10 years. We're going to actually become in equilibrium as a province here if this trend continues, which is a good thing because we'll start to have a rebound in pricing with that. The reason for that is this graph here. It's all about shale gas, and it's all about tight gas. It's all about unconventional natural gas supply. 2011, you can see that the shale gas and tight gas sand component is the dominant component for U.S. natural gas production, and it's going to get bigger. This is an interesting bar graph because it kind of projects what the capacity is for those resources. Forget about what they're doing today. The capacity going out to 2035 is the potential, if you brought in all the green, which is shale gas, and the tight gas component, and you can see the conventional is just very small. We've got a potential of 100 BCF a day of gas production in the U.S. Goop. Trouble is that the U.S. has basically kind of reached a static point in its gas demands. 2011, 2012, 2013 curves. The last 2 years you can see U.S. gas production has stayed around 65 BCF a day. That seems to be fulfilling their obligations as what the nation needs. So if they brought on 100 BCF a day, obviously they would have a lot of gas and a lot more than they could ever use. What does that mean to pricing? Pretty obvious. From a kind of a volatile, but a base mark of around $6 to $7 an MCF back 5 to 10 years ago, we're in the $3 world right now. And most dry gas production that I'm aware of is non-economic at these prices. What does that mean to rigs? Mark's going to talk about the rig forecast, I'm sure, for Canada, but on a North American context, and this slide's on the U.S., pretty obvious to see what happened. Massive drop-off in gas-directed drilling. But interesting, this is the first glimmer of the crystal ball. Oil-directed rigs taking off. So we're just transforming. The energy industry is transforming right now. U.S. crude imports are what's going to keep oil prices fairly robust. U.S. crude imports are the red line, and you can see that in approximately 2005, they were close to 5 billion barrels per year in the U.S. It's coming down by 1 billion barrels a year in the last few years. The reason, the increase in unconventional oil production. So actually, in the oil side, all we're doing is displacing, in North America, imports. So where's all this activity coming from? A lot of green areas on this map. There's that massive Marcellus gas play that I was talking about earlier. Pennsylvania, tad bit into New York, a little bit into Ohio, and that is a monster natural gas pool. Interestingly enough, the same geology extends up into this area here, into southern Quebec, a little bit into Ontario, and possibly another play emerging in New Brunswick, but those areas are shut down at current for exploration, by and large. Okay, I'm getting the beep. In Canada, though, in Alberta, again, Rick touched on this, but this is a little bit more colorful, Rick. Got better crayons than you.
Well, I noticed you put up an ST98 graph there
Okay, so you caught me. Geologists, we always have our crayons, right? The big plays, Montney, Cardium, Duvernay, Exshaw, are driving the activity in Alberta. Liquids-rich natural gas in the Montney, oil in the Montney in the Peace River country. Duvernay, I want to talk about Cardium and Exshaw. In the U.S., it's really two plays they've got that are monstrous. We've got maybe 3 to 4 that are emerging. It's the Eagle Ford and the Bakken. Those two plays, one in Texas and one in North Dakota, have added close to 2 million barrels a day of U.S. production, and they're ramping up. Bakken alone, look at that for a success story. In 2 years, from 400,000 to over 900,000 barrels a day. We're very, very good at doing this. The oil and gas industry is very, very effective at finding oil and gas supplies. But in Alberta, we've got something that's on the horizon. Duvernay. In 2 years, we've seen the numbers of wells on production grow from virtually nothing to about 40 wells. The number of wells spudded has increased up to about 160 minus that 40, and the new wells being licensed seems to suggest that this is an emerging play with some very, very significant promise. And 2 press releases last week have bared that out, and I'll answer that in the Q&A. We saw the little uptick in the oil production slide. That's because of this, and that's called the Cardium. Cardium oil production has turned around the fortunes of Alberta on oil production. In the U.S., this slide is showing the same trends, and that is the move to tight oil is going to dominate their transition from around 2 million barrels to upwards of 4.5 million barrels a day. So the acceleration of those plays I saw you earlier is going to continue. And now Swami comes out. Gas. The answer is simple. Go from this price curve to this price curve, or preferably some hybrid between these two curves. And what are those curves? This is our gas price at AECO, our spot market pricing, or NYMEX. This is Britain, this is Japan. I want these prices. How do you get those prices? Bingo. We're going to make this happen because it's too important for Western Canada to not. Take the gas from the massive infrastructure we have in Alberta, all the reserves and production along the deep basin of Alberta into Peace River country and into northeast BC, and get it out to the west coast and get it shipped. And right now, projects on the drawing boards are in excess of 8 BCF a day of gas that could get exported with 4 projects moving forward. And there's 10 on the drawing board. There they are. I'm not going to show them any longer. The exam's coming at the end. And then we've got the Duvernay on the Alberta side, which is the oil play. ExxonMobil announced about 3 days ago that they believe they've made, quote, a significant exploratory discovery and are moving to full-scale exploitation phase, going to 2 rigs operating daily, all in this area. Phenomenal results are coming out because it's gas, but with high, high liquids content. So my crystal ball says this is now going to accelerate and become the big driver for Alberta in light, tight oil, oil condensate, and liquid-rich gas. So, wrapping it up, I think the slides have spoken for themselves. It's all about unconventional going forward. U.S. has got its own gas supply. Canada has to have export markets developed to take care of Canadian demands and our standard of living in Canada for the gas producers. Alberta, though, is blessed with the Duvernay formation that could be quite comparable to the Eagle Ford, possibly at a different scale, but the Eagle Ford has been a massive success story in the U.S. If the Duvernay is even closer to that, that will be very significant. It takes will, and it takes strength and courage and convictions to make these energy projects working. and work for all of us. And if we can't get our act together, oh, I didn't mean to say that. I'm a science fiction kind of buff, so I thank you very much.